Lessons from the Dead Sea Scrolls and a Little Girl. Expecting the Messiah now on the Accessible Faith Project. Hi there, I'm John, and welcome to the Accessible Faith Project. If you're new here and looking for insights into the Bible, faith, and history in ways that engage your brain, then please hit subscribe and that little bell icon so you receive a notification every time I upload a new video. As we continue social distancing, I've been using the Accessible Faith Project to provide worship and devotional resources in addition to my educational videos. This one is a sermon, but as with most of my offerings, learning a little bit of history and context goes a long way in helping us to understand it all. This past Tuesday and Wednesday, I finished up our introductory seminar on the Dead Sea Scrolls at the church that I serve. It was a good experience and a lot of good questions. And some of you may not know this, that I had a chance to actually see some of the Dead Sea Scrolls in person in 2008 in an exhibit brought to the Royal Ontario Museum. It was quite the experience, and I was fascinated with how they set up the display. The entry to the exhibit had a massive wall made to look like bricks, each inscribed with a quote from the sectarian scrolls found on the dig sites at Qumran and the surrounding caves. Written in Hebrew, each saying is etched into the surface and then translated into both English and French. It was quite impressive, to be sure. The display continued, trying to set the period into context, and it shows artifacts from the period including pottery, coinage, maps, pictures, the kinds of things one might expect to see in a museum. As one gets closer and closer to where the scrolls are, I noticed that the lights were getting gradually darker and darker. The grandness of the entree gives way to the displays that become increasingly Spartan and minimalist. The dim light is so that the scrolls would remain protected from further light damage. When we finally got to the part of the display with some of the actual scrolls, while the room is quite large, it's dark. And there was nothing more than these 7 triangle-shaped pillars, each about 10 feet tall and roughly 4 or 5 feet across. The 3 sides had information on the particular scroll fragment in question, and one side had an enclosed angled shelf keeping the scroll. And to see the scroll on display, I had to bend over, put my face to the glass, cup my hands around my eyes, and let my eyes adjust so that I could see the writings on these very dark fragments of animal hide. And everyone in our group had to do this to see them. From those of us who were part of this visit, the comment I heard that was, I thought they'd be bigger, and followed closely by, it was too dark for me to see anything. One person was not all that impressed. He saw a dead leaf tracked into the building. He mentioned that it was tempting to pick it up and give it to one of the staff and say, "Here, you missed a piece." Since this was a traveling exhibition, we only had a sample of the true Dead Sea Scrolls. All but one of the ones that we saw came from the 4th cave found at the site. And while the 4th cave yielded the most documents in the archaeological dig, the storage system for the scrolls had fallen apart over time. The jars holding them smashed open when the shelves collapsed, exposing the scrolls to the weather and the elements. As such, none of the scrolls were found intact in this particular cave. Imagine trying to put together over 600 different jigsaw puzzles spread out over 15,000 pieces, and none of the puzzles were complete. The scrolls on display were assembled fragments of what were once larger documents, but even then, I have to admit that I was struck by how small they were when I saw the scrolls myself. The handwriting was amazing at that size, but they were still tiny. Even as one who had studied the scrolls from afar, it was something else to see these in person. And anytime we've seen the scrolls in pictures, they've been blown up and enhanced and presented way larger than life. Each of us had come with an expectation of what we might see, and in many ways, the expectation was greater than what we saw. It was a lesson in Advent expectation and anticipation, that it was far more profound than any sermon that I could come with, which is why I'm sharing this story. So how's this for a parallel? The scrolls were written and collected at a time where the expectation for the Messiah was extremely high. Not only that, there were diverse and conflicting opinions on what the Messiah was and who the Messiah could be and what this Messiah would do and what the Messiah would look like. And here's a little bit of trivia. The Dead Sea Scrolls displayed a Messiah theology that involved not one but 2 individuals. One would be a religious Messiah that would restore the temple's purity and the people's fidelity to God, while the other would be a political Messiah who would free the people from Roman rule and reestablish an independent nation. Just about anybody who lived on the eastern shores of the Mediterranean around the time that Jesus lived had an opinion on the Messiah. People had built up such huge expectations that nobody, not even Jesus, could fulfill them. It's a lesson for us in waiting. Expectation and anticipation can be reasonable, but it can become so obsessive that we become blind to the very thing that we are waiting for. Advent is about anticipation and expectation, but also about letting ourselves be open to the possibilities of God showing up in the one place that we're not looking. Advent is all about waiting and anticipation, but it's not this kind of narrow waiting. 20 years ago, in the lead up to the turn of the millennium, there was a lot of anticipated hype and date setting that Jesus would appear in Jerusalem. I remember reading a story at that time that a small group of Christians, adamant in their literal interpretation of the Bible as future history, and so confident were they in their understanding that they traveled to Jerusalem and set up a vigil near the gate where they expected Jesus to appear on the stroke of midnight on New Year's Eve. One had even gone so far as to set up a video camera that pointed at the spot where they expected Jesus to appear. Needless to say, Jesus did not appear on cue. I think it's a word of caution to us. Advent is about waiting and anticipation, possibility and promise, and still the dark side of it is to build up expectations that are so specific that we cannot recognize God right in our midst. Shifting gears a little bit, think of it this way. There are 4 words that we associate with Advent, and all of them are about the best parts that come with waiting and anticipation. They are hope, peace, joy, and love. It's about being open to the possibilities and promise of God, while at the same time continually pointing to something better that is yet to come. But when we try to control these expectations, when we try to bind them up and impose our own will on them, we lose them. Oh yes, one little detail that I forgot to mention. We brought my daughter along with us to visit the Dead Sea Scrolls at the time. It was a family affair. And at the time, she was 3 years old going on 4 and did not wait in line very well. We had to settle an occasional temper tantrum, but once we got her into the scroll chamber, I decided to lift her up and show her what we had come to see. It was a fragment of the Deuteronomy scroll, and we looked down at the scraps of parchment and the writings, and Megan turned to me and said, "Daddy, it's beautiful." She came in with no expectations at all. So for her expectations of size, of readability, or whatever I had imagined that I didn't see, she was able to appreciate the joy and the beauty in something that I never really thought of as beautiful. Fascinating? Absolutely. Enlightening? Yeah. Beautiful? Well, not really. But here I felt that I was trying to help Megan learn about how to wait, and for a brief moment, she taught me what waiting really was. I realized that all I was trying to do was to teach her to line up in good form, but I wasn't teaching her how to wait. For her, in the brief moments before we got to the scrolls that she wanted to see, she wanted to touch, she appreciated what was around her, and we were just trying to get her to sit still in the stroller, and she said to me, "Daddy, it's beautiful." It was a lesson that the waiting in Advent appreciates the moment and the beauty in the places that we least expected. Maybe our lesson is that simple. Don't let our expectations get the better of us, and appreciate the beauty of waiting on God in the moment. Amen.